To be loved. Oh, what a feeling. What a feeling to be loved. How are you, Cosmic Kinfolk? I'm black to tackle something that will linger in your subconscious until next year's Juneteenth. I've been working on reintroducing the concept of every planet wears a crown, which was a 4-part lecture series I did last summer. Check it out on this YouTube channel if you'd like to gain more information on a deeper hidden knowledge of the histories of our species. Today I'm going to smack dab you with some hidden knowledge from a concise cosmic view, not limited by Caucasian bias and their limited mastery, hoping to give you that dab-tastic energy you've been missing, descendants of kings, queens, gods, and goddesses. Modern civilization owes itself to an African or a Central World dispersion of knowledge and information in which color is highly overlooked by the information being told from the lips of those who do not have melanin, non-brownies, as my mom would say. When you look at what the continent of Africa is, you can see that it is at the center of the entire planet. It is the one centerpiece from which the Pangea grows. The other is Antarctica. Now, being well-read, there are many scholars of non-melanated descent who have made specific novel discoveries about the ancient civilization have come to the clear understanding that the Ethiopian knowledge is the perennial civil and religious systems that Chinese, Japanese, European, North American, South American, and Indian people adopt and inherit their universal knowledge from. Let's start by examining the likes of Thoth, who was the god of wisdom and writing. Now hold my Heket. That's Egyptian for beer. Thoth was and will always be the melanated guardian of writing. Innately, Thoth was superior to every godhead before him and should be credited as the progenitor of the scribes who take claim to have written the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, and many other religious works. Even when you go back to the likes of Herodotus, he explains that, now don't quote me on this, the Egyptian gods were brown-skinned with curly hair. Mwah. Which means Thoth was of this nature. Now, consequently, why does this matter? As a matter of fact, skin tone is the last level of information we will be discussing here. Let's break this knowledge down into 4 parts. Part 1 will be genetics. Part 2 will be epigenetics. Part 3, DNA harmonics. And part 4, melanin and organs. Let's start with number 1, genetics. If we start at the very basic level of fractal molecules for programming consciousness, genetics determines the level of a physical awareness of those in this universe on planetary systems inhabited by a powerful consciousness known as God. Without certain physical body structures, observation would be absent. Do you know what I mean? Genetics creates physical structures like brains, eyes, hands, feet, gills, fins, the leaves, the bark on the trees, etc. And on this plane of existence where we use these physical body parts, it matters. Humans are at a level where free will can be exerted upon our natural environment. Our ability to pass forward genetic information to future generations is the gift to our children, if the knowledge of the deeper sciences of programming DNA is done with a good intent. So genetic plays a very important part in allowing for the cosmic spark within the genetic structure to have a level of awareness capable of being free to do the things in nature of God and the devil, which means to me, as I'm getting bit by mosquitoes, that both these words are derived from a spell of those who misinterpreted a lot of the things Thoth explains in the book of Going Forth by Day, which Western civilization happened to misname the Book of the Dead. Let's discuss this for a second. Do you recall many stories where God and the devil communicate in the Bible, and God allows the devil to do certain things to people as it's written in the Bible? That to me should be a clear indicator that God does not hate the devil. In fact, God uses the devil as a tool at that point to smack certain people across their spiritual foreheads. I can reference the story of Lot. I could reference the story of Jonah. I could reference the story of Joshua. I could reference the story of Moses. But that's just for the Christian learned folk out there. Go back into your remembrance of those stories and ask your internal God being, why were the progenitors of powerful godlike communication allowed to be tortured? A better example, actually, is when Jesus is in the desert and the proverbial devil comes to tempt him. Jesus could have easily cast the devil to the side, but entertains the devil, and the devil walks with him and explains to him, I can give you the whole world if you just bow down to me. Why would a Christ-like being even feel tempted by a power of a so-called lower being if one already possesses that power? Nothing that the devil tempted Jesus with was a sin. Think about that for a second. Just think about that. From a Hindu folk out there, I'm also reminded of Krishna and Arjuna. Krishna explains to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, you must be detached from the outcome in this case. And you have a Godhead telling him that killing should be his call of duty if necessary. To me, that is a bigger temptation, closer to what the Bible describes as sin outright. However, Krishna is a Christ-like being. Does that mean Christ-like beings are subject to seeing the ills and strikes against the flesh of other human beings? Or does it more better translate that there's an infinite place that, when perceived correctly, removes the illusion of sin? Well, genetics says to me that many of us humans are capable of reaching that Godhead state along with the power to control the devil. Let's call it the go-devil head state. This is just a combination of words, God and devil. And you have to be grateful that genetics allows you the ability to have a body structure capable of doing both perceived good and perceived evil. Without the hands to build, we would have no evidence of great civilizations in Egypt, Mesopotamia, South America, North America, and beyond. Just look at the Great Pyramids at the Giza built by human hands. That's a genetic marker. Somewhere along the way, African ancestry had a higher technology than just using their hands, which is actually very unsimilar to what we are using today to build with this metal technology. Fractal information embedded in our genetics is similar to an archive of the great library that never ends. That being said, we are all part of this infinite information. Many spiritual people call this the Akasha. But little do they know where it resides. Which leads me into my next part, epigenetics. I'm getting bitten up by mosquitoes like something serious. Ugh. But anyway, let's keep going. As new human civilizations flourish and die, what is retained is what is called instinct. Instinctive nature builds into every species over time and many generations that pass and absorb their environment to become more in tune with it. Scientists call this evolution. The spiritualist noticed it's the fractal growing based on the harmonic frequencies it receives over thousands and thousands of iterations between birth and death of our generations. Now, melanin is a great source of epigenetic power. The cells that generate melanin are built with tentacles, like my hair. Much unlike the other cells of the body, melanocytes are a magical cell structure. Now, I'm using the word magical as an adjective to exaggerate the power of melanin. Let me remind you, non-science people, that melanin comes from a special cell called the melanocyte. Much like the cell of a leaf that has special cells creating chlorophyll to convert UV light into energy. Melanocyte does this exact same thing in the human epidermis and many other places. And as a caveat, scientists say it's protecting the cells from UV damage on the DNA. In contrast, it's actually doing a process to re-encode the DNA with information from the sun. Now, you might be saying, Dab, your intelligence level is speaking above my head. This is perfectly okay. because I'm forcing you, if you want to understand the words coming out of my mouth, that you must do some more scientific research of your own. What I'm leading you to is the understanding that science has misinterpreted melanin as a protective layer and not an information gathering layer in the body of the human being. Now, some of you out there might be movie buffs, and you might have seen this movie called Django. If you haven't, it's okay, but pretend for a moment that you're with me. In this movie, your white boy, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, describes the African skull. He points out specific places on the anatomy of the skull where the race is subject to more human emotion and being empathetic, even for its masters. The reference is actually where he's degrading the race of melanated people and explaining that they love being subjugated. He's basically justifying the fact that with all their feelings, they feel for their own masters who've put them in slavery. This was just a metaphor for the reality of what goes down in epigenetics of beings who remember sun information. To answer the question you're pondering, yes, melanocytes are genetic listeners for genetic sun information. They interpret the hormones released by the cells you are receiving with this UV radiation and create more melanin to absorb that UV information. Ultraviolet information is at a higher spectrum than normal eyesight, which most normal people infer as a spiritual world. And it's a hidden world of knowledge in the Akashic records. So epigenetics, the changing genetics of our species, is first and foremost governed by the sun's UV information. The second layer of epigenetics is governed by the frequency of sound. The third layer of epigenetics is governed by the information of sight. If flies don't eat bird shit, then I'm lying to you. So in essence, the brilliance of UV light is that it comes from every source we see in the night sky, from the moon to the stars to the galaxies. So does that mean UV light is the universal information source solely? Well, not necessarily. Again, I did mention sound. Be conscious that in epigenetics, we are dealing with things that change DNA. Let's just take some logic and list the things that change DNA and potentially change DNA. UV light, sound. The first two here are obvious components of what we are dealing with. But then you also have words, images, the television, movies, books, pictograms, repeated message like politics. A better example might be rhetoric. We have the physical environments we live in, our cultures, pollution, food, the liquids we ingest, the compound chemicals we ingest. Now, based on this knowledge, did you know that your DNA is constantly changing? As you evolve as an individual, you're going to pass on what you've individually learned to the next generation that your seeds become. So not only are the children our future, but they're also our library of our own past. Our challenge with this knowledge is to utilize it to its fullest and not be misled by Western technology and ideas. I challenge you with this knowledge is to gain more ground in the multidimensional reality we live in. Don't be bound by the box of Western civilization, because they can only remember but so far. What we deal with in the current epigenetics from our recent ancestors is a hell of a lot of trauma here in America and abroad. Western science logically says trauma does not matter and one should move forward. No reparations are needed, especially in regards to slavery of a culture and raping of a culture to profit from its multiple generations. I asked you this. It's not to tell you that it's traumatic to the entire population of America, but it's to know that how great blacks are at everything, but yet don't reap the benefits that are exploited from our cultural technology. If you don't see that, then this information is not for you, and you do not understand that we are chosen here and we don't have to believe in Western ideologies. This is a huge case for us to take it back epigenetically, programming ourselves and utilizing ourselves to our fullest potential for the next incoming generations. Which brings me to my next point, which is DNA harmonics. Let's take the next section, it's just as serious as the first two sections, and you've probably never heard of this topic. We just learned about finding our light sources. You know, in a spiritual communities, they've always been saying, be the light, be a light worker, bring more people to the light of Christ. Since this is the case, I just described to you what is said in the Bible. If your body is full of light, your heart's and mind's eye will be single and accurate in accuracy in the best sense. But you can compare the Bible to the Akashic records in DNA. I began this lecture by talking about instinct and inherited knowledge and understanding. So without getting too deep, DNA harmonics are the ability to talk back to DNA and receive information from DNA on a more conscious level than being unconscious about it, which is just instinct. This is what a lot of people call the hidden level. Do you have a harmonic in your DNA where you hear the ancestors, and ancestors are more like what is seen in the movie Avatar? These things are natural for godlike beings. Only do we call this a God state because it is a higher place than where we are when we are just instinctive. Breather. That's a lot. There is an understanding to know without knowing, and this is considered being psychic. Well, it's also best explained as being DNA harmonic. Every fractal that the DNA is a combination of very simple symbols. A, C, G, T. Adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thiamine. Even the harmonics of the piano have 5 more levels of notes that can be played in the expression of sound. Our DNA harmonics only needed 4. Adenine itself, for the first one, is just 5 nitrogen atoms, 5 carbon atoms, and 5 hydrogen atoms in a very strong covalent bond. I like the carbon atom here because it is an expression of the 6th power of the nuclear energy. I like the hydrogen atom here because it is the singularity expression of nuclear energy. I love the nitrogen atom here because it is the expression of 7 powers of nuclear energy. The notes that this nucleotide plays in our genetic makeup is very special based on its own fractal melody, which make up its material. Now, instead of boring you through this lecture with a lot of technical facts, let's just assume the other 3 nucleotides of the ACGT are just as important in their fractal structure. Each of the 4 basic nucleotides can only harmonize in certain ways, particular to expressing a larger entity called a living being. Of course, along the way, they build the many little life-building blocks for hormones to large organ systems, and in many aspects, when creating higher vibrating beings, mimic the larger structure of the universe. Hence, a very popular saying among spiritual folk, as is above, so is below. Now, pardon me. I'm trying to get this information compressed for the innate mind. DNA harmonics translates across space and time. Fibonacci sequences are an expression of the eternal knowledge crammed into the DNA harmonics among species. When DNA is influenced by the structures of melanin and its information it's passing, it allows for DNA to harden itself and evolve in a more typical pattern for survival. Once you concede to this message, you no longer subscribe to the idea of Western civilization, passing melanin off as just a protector of DNA from abnormal mutations, but also as a catalyst for normal mutations of the greater survival. Which one must conclude is the ultimate fractal? It's ever evolving to keep the repetition of consciousness perpetuated forever. Which now leads me to our final topic for you to expand on your own knowledge, which is melanin and our organ structures. Where do you think the most shocking place is to find melanin in the body? If you answered the brain, pat yourself on the back for at least being ahead of your class. Do you get it? The head is in the brain. The melanin in the brain is called neuromelanin. The fact is, Western science has no facts on your melanin beyond its motor capabilities for transmitting information. The melanin, the neuromelanin, they really don't have anything else yet. Now, I want you to pause again and think for a second. If you have any level of insight, what I just said to you should be a huge clue and indicator, even to the non-scientific mind, about what melanin has as subdimensional powers. So in this day and age, with movements in the black communities talking about melanin magic, they're referring to the fact they don't know because magic appears to be an illusionist's reality of something spectacular. Well, my cosmic kinfolk, there is no illusion here. Most of the time, we like to rap in our hip-hop songs about the lower things of humans, like how much money they have, what kind of jewelry they're wearing, how's their shoe game, maybe even their interest in gaining more wealth and obtaining a higher state of notoriety, or let's call it fame. Well, that is part of the illusion or Maya pulled over our mind state to keep melanin magic just hidden. The brain is a very special organ. It organizes your life into a filing system of vivid images, sounds, and smells and tastes for your pleasure or torture of having lived in DNA's crystalline structure. This is a very simplistic definition, but it's also the most true. The brain is our best tool for opening up the existence prior to you being here. In our minds, a structure called the midbrain is a very novice way of describing a very complex part of the brain's organ structure. Our middle brain, which houses several special glands, and we will point out specifically the pioneer or pineal gland, are tied to a very powerful system in the body called Kundalini. Kundalini is a vibration through the major organs of the body structure, organizing the DNA frequencies remembrance. It is considered a column of energy that is starting at the base of our spine or our nervous system, all the way to the top of our spine in the midbrain. Above that would be the external hidden places that melanin actually talks to and extracts the many things we seem to cause our creativity, our imagination, and our ability to explore beyond the box of our confined flesh. Now, water makes up 75% of the brain's weight. In fact, we know that, sure it is. I start with this fact, and do you know the message of what the two atoms of water comprise? I'll pause right there and let you think about that.